You can start to put those in the chat whenever you are ready. It is 3:30 now. So again, I'll say welcome. We are so glad you joined us here for our finale to Read and Explore with OLLI 2022. This was our sixth winner that we've done this. I'd like to thank our Read and Explore committee, which is Barbara Yantz, Gary Ayton, Judy Ayton, Mary Foley, Ellen Bache, and Betty Jo Shaw. They have put together, again, another great program for Read and Explore. And so we are glad you all are here to join us for this one. And I had a little sneak peek talking with our author, Lynda, yesterday, and she was so much fun to meet and talk to. So I know you all are going to enjoy the next hour very much. So I'm going to hand it over to our author of West with Giraffes, Lynda Rutledge.
Oh, hello, everyone. Hi. So anybody here like giraffes? Yeah, maybe. Good.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about them a lot. I think what I really need to do is to begin is tell you a story about a story. And that story is, if you read most of you, I bet, have, as I understand it, most of you have read the book. And at the end of the book, I have an author's note, if you recall. And a lot of this information is there, but I want to tell you a little bit more. I'm going to tell you a story about a story, and that story is this one, where this began. In 1999, I was researching the history of the San Diego Zoo, and I was having a lot of fun in the archives, and I stumbled on these scrapbooks, and the scrapbooks were really, really old, and they were falling apart and that sort of thing. And but I slowly went through them, very carefully went through them, because of course that people have been cutting out and saving these things. Volunteers have been saving these scraps, and of course they are really old and yellowed and that kind of thing. And I was having a great time, and I was actually taking pictures of them, of course, so I could take them with me and decide what I'm going to do with them. And I stumbled upon this. I mean, there's so many great stories, as you might imagine, over 100 years. I was writing the history of the book of the San Diego Zoo for the first centennial, and I was going to start doing that anyway. And there's a lot of great stories, but this one was ridiculously remarkable. It started out with two giraffes, as you all know by now, who survived a hurricane. And then after they survived the hurricane, get to New York, as you already know, they actually put them in a truck, which wasn't much more than just this tricked out pickup. And they actually drove cross country before, interstates, which took about 12 days. And so I decided that, I was fascinated at the time. I wasn't a novelist at the time. I was a professional writer, and I'd also been a travel writer. And so I was fascinated, with not just the history, this one story, but also the idea of a road trip, and essentially a road trip with giraffes. And then how was that even possible back then? I actually started looking for, as you might remember from the author's note, I started looking for a diary from this man who pulled it off. The real man's name was Charlie Smith, and he was the head keeper in 1938. And Belle Benchley, who is a real person and was actually remarkable, she's needs a book all about. I think there's several of books about her already. She was the first female zoo director in the world, and she was widely known around the world and wrote bestsellers that actually were international bestsellers about her life there at the zoo. So she's been kind of forgotten since then, but she certainly wasn't then. She was in newsreels that would be up, if you recall, newsreels, essentially, when they would up with movies. She was in, they had a ongoing newsreel thing they did. Point is, I knew that that I looked around for the diary, and of course didn't find one, because those people, the guys back then, they could, the keepers were not the kind of guys who created diaries, writing diaries. So I gave it up because I wasn't a novelist yet. But I had literary pretensions, and I knew that ultimately, maybe one day, I might come back to it. And then, of course, as I told you in the author's note, about 10 or 15 years passed. We had to kind of stop working on the history book for obvious reasons. I think the biggest one was 9/11. And when I was called back in 2012 to get it done by 2016, then the thing we now know and have been, I'm sure if you haven't heard of it, then there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, so maybe you haven't, but it's called the Sixth Extinction. And I had started reading about it about 2013, 2012, probably mainly because I was around all these zoologists. And so essentially I was educated about what it was, and I began to think a lot about those giraffes. And the only reason I think I wanted to spend time thinking about those giraffes is that I was so impressed with how they made me feel, and how they made humans better people just by being around them, and why animals did that, and why, so I essentially decided that I would start, while I was writing the history of the zoo, I'd start playing around with the idea. And as I told Nancy, I finally erased it, but before I erased my whiteboard, I started working on a whiteboard, and I decided to make it a road trip whiteboard. And as I was telling Nancy, and sent her the picture of it, Nancy, if you want to show her that, I essentially decided to try to work out, using literary, arcs and that sort of thing, a road trip that would, if just see if it was possible to write it, to essentially write it. And whoops, there it is. I don't know if y'all can see it. It is quite messy, but you get the picture. I spent about a year on that. And if you'll notice, the green, the red, and the blue, those are the different characters. Blue is Woody, and the green was the old man, and red was, of course, Red. And I started from the right to the left. Well, actually, if you notice, I went from left to right, which after the while I thought I should have done the other way around, but going cross country from, but essentially I ended up doing this, and it's quite something. And so after about a year, I decided I was ready to write. I think I had a story I could tell. One of the things that I did also notice, that I didn't just find some newspaper clippings, I also found telegrams and postcards. And one of the telegrams was amazing. One of the telegrams was from Lloyd's of London. Now, if y'all know about Lloyd's of London, it's an insurance company that insures things that are insurable. And so, believe it or not, Bill Benchley insured with Lloyd's of London the giraffes, and they insured them for blowouts and tornadoes and what was the other one? Floods, I think. And so essentially I thought, well, okay, there's three things that could happen. And so I kind of decided that I would just move along and see, what I could do. And it was really incredible to be doing that while I was also writing this history of the San Diego Zoo. I would stop and essentially have a good time playing with my idea. And so what happened then was finally I decided that I was ready to write, and I started up writing. And I have to say that one reader, once it finally got out, which took forever too. I don't know if y'all know much about the editorial process. If any of you have had books published, you might know how long that takes. It actually takes about a year after you have finished and doing the editing. So it probably usually takes a couple of years, since the editing takes quite a while too. But by the time it came out, of course, I was all worried about how it would be received and if anybody would see it, because, you know, lots of things were happening in 2020 when it came out in February, and we just had the election, etc. And so I was really amazed at how many people were ready to read a story about giraffes in 1938. And what has happened, one of the readers said that, I think you'd appreciate this, that I wrote a travelogue, a historical novel, a social and political commentary, a coming of age story, and a love story all in one book. And I thought, yeah, okay, I like that very much. I kind of was also thinking about, well, that's also kind of a welcome to my mind sort of situation. It's complicated up there. But the second thing that I recall is that I had another reader tell me that she said that she was laughing and she was crying, and she was sad to see it end, but her heart was full. And I think that's a great thing for a novelist to hear. And I can only hope that you felt the same way when you finished the book. And that's my little spiel. Got any questions?
We do have questions. We've already had some pop in. So here we go. Let's see. And we're just going to, these will probably be all over the place and in no particular order.
Okay.
So our first question from Bernard is, were you able to choose the title of the book, or did the publisher choose it? And were there any other titles that were considered?
That's a great question. You'll notice that, I think you probably noticed on my whiteboard that I called it something else. It was called, just as well, back it up. In publishing, almost always, whatever your title is not going to be the title. They're going to monkey with it, and it usually comes out to be a good thing, because they have an actual title meetings where they will have people that are, you know, part of their board, etc., part of the editorial board, who sit around and just try to come up with other titles. With me, they asked me to come up with some. And I really loved an old book called West with the Nights, by Beryl Markham. I don't know if any of you have read that, but oh my gosh, it was quite amazing. And it was written in well, she was a contemporary of Ernest Hemingway, for instance, and she was in Africa. And she was a pilot. She was a female pilot. Anyway, I was trying to come up with some other ideas, and I was looking over in my bookshelf, and I saw that, and I realized that that was absolutely a terrific idea if I just decided to write West Side. So I popped another one on there. They gave me about, I don't know, 4 or 5. I gave them about 4 or 5. And the only one I really liked was West with Giraffes. And I knew they weren't going to go with mine. And the more I saw it, the more I saw West with Giraffes, with the look of it, and how much shorter it was, that sort of thing. I, kept thinking, oh, I do wish hope they choose that. And they did. So I'm happy to say it was mine.
That's great. Okay, our next question. First, she says, we loved your writing style and love the way you captured the dialogue and personality of the Dust Bowl teen and the old man. But then her question is, her husband is a giraffe educator at our zoo. Oh my. And she says, our giraffes will not eat onions. So where did you get the idea for onions on this trip?
Yeah, don't tell me you actually tried to give him onions. I'm impressed. I got it straight from, if you notice those newspaper articles. Now, every newspaper articles in the book are almost verbatim ones. Took a little bit of literary license, but the content of them, especially, are almost verbatim for the ones that I chose from 1938. I decided which ones could go where to help tell the story. And the last one, when they got there, it actually said, I was, read that first before I even started doing my whiteboard or anything, all the articles. And the last one, the San Diego Union, I think it was the Union, or just the Union at the time, the article said that it quoted the Charlie Smith saying that onions have power. She said, that's the only way we got them out of the crates. They wouldn't come out and go into, they've been traveling in there forever, right? And they wouldn't go out into the big, huge enclosure that the giraffe had at the time. And he said that the only way they got them out was with onions. They offered them onions. So he said, onions have power. So I thought, okay, then I'm going to have a lot of fun with that.
Oh, goodness. So next question, had you met someone like Woody Nickel, or how did you create that character?
Oh, okay. Well, another reader, I've been getting lots of wonderful emails from readers. And one of them said, he said, do you know an 17-year-old boy, or do you have one? And I said, well, maybe I was one. I was a tomboy, so maybe in a way I kind of understood. I think I've understood both girls and boys, but a 17-year-old boy wasn't that far a reach for me. And I think a lot of it has to do with the times. I read Hardy Boy books as well as Nancy Drew books, right? And I know all of you know who I'm talking about. And essentially, I was able to think about him in a way, and as well is read too. I was kind of fascinated myself that it was easy as it was. I had my first novel was essentially third person, and it was about an older lady, and it was and a daughter, and of course that was not that hard. This one, I wondered what I was about to get myself into, especially making it first person, as well as, but he was also much older, which also was a trick, because, he was writing about being 18, but he was writing when he was 105. So looking back, so that was fun, trying to figure out how I was going to balance all that. Now, I'm from Texas, and I saw that the Lee Highway, which I had to also kind of guess, which is what they took. There was only two major highways at the time across country, and one of them was the Lincoln Highway, and that was higher up. It went, up far, much farther north in the cold, and then came down to LA. The Lee Highway, I figured, had to be the one they took because it was the only cross country, and it went to San Diego. But you also had to hook up at Washington, D.C. And that's why I had to get them there to Washington first and then pop them on there. But at the time, I was thinking, what can we do? What can I do when I'm on the road? What can I do to make this work with my all that's Texas ideas and thoughts and I have up in my head? And one of them was that I noticed that the Lee Highway went across the Panhandle. Now we know this, the Dust Bowl happened, and we knew that essentially about the same time, and it was incredibly dramatic, going on for about 10 years. But it was in Oklahoma, really. But I noticed that it was happening in the Panhandle too. I read a book called The Worst Hard Times, which was about the Dust Bowl, and I mentioned it in my acknowledgments in the back of the book. It's one of the many things the research I did, and it was very helpful in just getting a grasp of what it was like to have a farm, be a nester, not a sharecropper, but a nester, someone who actually owned land and to lose it, and want to go to California. But so that was kind of the way it started out. But the boy thing, thankfully, came in handy. The tomboy thing came in handy for the boy thing.
Well, so related to that, was it always your idea to have him be the narrator from the beginning, or did it just kind of work out the way as you worked on the story?
Well, when I started writing it, I wanted it to be, okay, here's the context. I wanted to say something about the extinction situation now. And the best way to do that is not just tell a story back in 1938, but to set it a couple of years into the future, and have the man look back. And of course, I had to do math at that point, trying to figure out how old he was in 1938, and if that would work, and and did he have a driver's license? But I don't know about y'all, but I had a driver's license at 14 in rural Texas. I grew up in small town Texas, and I had a driver's license at 14. I took a driver's course. And so, I mean, I didn't think that was unusual, but I switched him and made him 17 because of Red. I wanted him to fall in love, of course. That's essentially what happened there. That essentially I had to decide that, put it in the future, put it a little bit in the future, and then have the man think back. And I had to then, the fun part about that was trying to make that sound authentic, and not too authentic. I couldn't have him do too much dialect, but I had to make him sound like he was 105. And so I did start out with him. That was the idea, and I stuck with it.
Okay, you talked a lot about your writing process. And so Gary asks about two other books of yours, Brave New Wanda and Faith Bass Darling's Last Garage Sale. Did you have a similar research process with that fancy whiteboard, or did you kind of come to those in a different way?
No, very different. In fact, I'm surprised you knew about Brave New Wanda. Thank you for reading that. That was, I thought I won an Illinois Arts Council award for that. I was playing around with the idea. I was doing research back in the 1990s or in the late 80s about in vitro fertilization, all those new things that were happening as a journalist at the time. And I just got this crazy idea to try to have fun with this, with the kid who wanted to find his daughter, find her father. And again, it won a Illinois Arts Council award, but didn't really ever get published in a big company. It essentially just was picked up by a little bitty company that's still in existence, but it's just barely out there. And it's become more of a young adult novel, to be honest. And it was a learning process. Let's put it this way: it was a learning process. I have far too many. I mean, I've been a reader all my life, and I also had literary pretensions all my life. I always wanted to be a novelist. And here in the last part of my life, I finally figured it out and did it, and that's quite a wonderful thing, I have to say. But it was, I kind of cringe. I hope you didn't cringe. The guy whoever said they read it, because it was a learning process, and I have gotten, I can only hope, a lot better a writer since then.
Okay, next question. The circus, some of the circus guys were the bad guys in the book, and so was it common practice for circus people to try and steal unusual animals during that time period? Well,
I thought about that, and I did some research on it too, because I sure wanted it to do. I sure wanted to do it. We had to have a bad guy. It had to be about right there, and I really wanted him to be a really memorable bad guy. And so I realized that I think I even wrote this in the book once I kind of got a grasp of what was happening at the time. I think old man got to talk about this. He said, have him say that fly-by-night circuses were happening all the time. They were really more menageries. They weren't Barnum and Bailey by any means, you know. And there were a lot of them, and they would come in one night and they would go to the next, and they would come in and one go to the next, and they could get away with a lot because because there was, you know, you could actually leave, go to the next town, and get and escape your past, whatever you did. This was the world back then, and I think we find it kind of hard to believe that that's possible, but that's the way it was back in the 30s. And you know, and as you might imagine, I also did a whole lot of research on what the life was like then, as I explained, and a lot of men just started walking, and just, you know, aimlessly, because they didn't have jobs, didn't have any family to connect with, and they just started walking. And I can imagine what they'd have to do to continue to live, the things that they'd have to steal, the thing they'd have to, you know, just to get by. And also, it's why I was talked about how I've actually had I had a woman tell me that her mother wrote an entire little book just for their family about how bums would come to her back door and how she handled it. And I found that absolutely fascinating. And of course, that happened all the time. In fact, to the point that I found a lot of research about how they would the bums would mark these, you know, good Christian folks' houses that they knew that would feed them. And it was quite a thing just to kind of understand how these things came about, and how if they were possible. And before I ever put them in, I wanted them to at least be possible, or it wouldn't sound real. It wouldn't read real. And so I had to have a basis, just because of my journalism background. I had to have a basis for all of them. And I think that's kind of why, maybe one of the great reasons why it does seem to read. I do have some, you know, called it far-fetched. Some of the things were far-fetched, and yes, they were. You know, it was, you know, we're novel, but not so far-fetched that you would go roll your eyes in the middle of the book. There's something called, as you may know, if you know anything about literature, called the suspension of disbelief. And you have, when you get into a book, if you can put the book down, and if you start rolling your eyes and believe, and you know, in disbelief, then you know that book is not worth your time. And I wanted that book to be so I wanted it to be something that that you didn't want to put down, and that and of course the road trip itself, with all the problems and the things that happened, and it could happen, you would keep it going no matter what, if I was able to write it well enough to make you believe it. And so hopefully, I mean, the circus, let's go back to the question, the circus part, the answer is yes, but only in a certain groups that, of course, you know, probably met their doom in other ways, you know, doing bad things.
Okay, I think everyone on the Zoom has read the book. We're about to get into some spoiler alerts here. So we have a question. Well, to lead into this, I remember at some point, Woody finds Red's little list of the things she wants to accomplish. And it's like meet Margaret Burke White and have a daughter and all these things. And so yes, at the end, it was the daughter that got the scrapbooks. That was a nice, or I think it was. That's the question. Was that the daughter?
Was, yes.
And then can you talk a little bit about Woody and Red's relationship sort of as the book ended?
Oh, well, that is a spoiler alert. So
I think it's okay. We're there. So
well, I had when I finally decided what to do with Red, that you notice she had you know, bad heart, a rheumatic fever, and again, we don't really, you know, we're so, we're vaccinated up the wazoo, and essentially it's a wonderful thing. We don't have polio. We don't have, we don't have rheumatic fever anymore. Well, that wasn't the case in 1938. And in fact, 1920 is when she essentially was born. And I felt it was important for her, if I was going to have the ending. And frankly, I got to tell you guys, I actually thought of the ending almost from the beginning. I'm one of those writers that really can't write without knowing what, at least an ending that I could change later, but I have to have an ending. And oddly enough, that ending came, and it was going to be almost exactly the same wording as the beginning. And so it would resound for the reader to hear that exactly what was said at the beginning, to remind them where it started, and then to also know where it was going to go. And I felt like that the best way would be that she had to have a reason to not go all the way to San Diego. She had to have a reason I had to do something with her. She couldn't really finish this thing with him because, for one thing, there was a Life magazine photographer, already there waiting, and she was going to be unmasked, waiting there with a telegram. I think it's how I handled it, with Bill telling the old man about that. And of course, the old man at that point knew that Red was just going to do all this on spec, and we didn't really have an assignment. But I got to say, it's funny. I think Red in many ways was me, and it's much easier if you have to identify with all your characters, but and as you might imagine, I had a little trouble with the old man, but not much. I mean, I've been around cranky old sweet guys most of my life, growing up with grandpas and stuff, and farm people, but Red had to be a dreamer. And of course, as many of us women were and are, to get anywhere to where we are now, at least, especially, we had to be dreamers, and I needed her to be a dreamer. And she had to also break a lot of the expectations, the social expectations for the time. And I kind of felt like I could do that. And so it was a little easier for me. It would be hard, but Red would be the kind of person who understood that she probably wasn't going to live long, and therefore she was going to do what she needed to do to be happy and to have fun. And when she saw the giraffes go by, she knew that was her chance. And so she did a little lying, and she did a little stealing, and everybody did, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, if you're really asking, I think what you're really asking is about him loving Woody, loving her, and not knowing what to do with that. And essentially, I had a really fun writing that sweet part in Arizona, where he understands that he could have this one night laying and sitting at the stars, with her, and knowing that she is upset and not knowing what she's going to do, what's going to be her future, and he can just be there with her. And I had, I really loved being able to do that for Woody and for Red. And then, of course, what they did with at the train was even more fun. So
yeah. So the next two things, kind of a comment and a question, which sort of go together. One person said the descriptions of Woody and the old man riding along beside the railroad were very descriptive and made you feel that you were there. So then another person has asked a question. Did you actually make that road trip in person? Did you try to recreate?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, as I mentioned it earlier, I was a travel writer I saw the world. I had so much fun. I moved up to Chicago in my late 30s, and with the spouse, and then I just went crazy doing freelance writing, and I started doing travel writing, and and I was also writing books and stuff like that for other people at the time. But what I was really doing was holding my breath, waiting for the phone to ring. So I could go, they would give me an assignment and I would go do something. And a lot of times it was, well, like for instance, I got $100 to go and spend 7 days on the Danube River. You know, the money was not important, you know. So essentially, I believe it or not, I actually we were up in Chicago, and I actually it wasn't a train, but I love trains, and I was able to do trains all over everywhere, Spain and, you know, Europe, all over the thing. And I was able to remember that. I used all that information. And what I did with the road trip was, believe it or not, I actually was living in Chicago. We moved to San Diego, and it worked for me and didn't work for my husband. And so essentially we had to leave, but at that time, it's where I met everybody at the San Diego Zoo and started writing books at that time in the late 90s. And so we drove pretty much all that. We drove across that ocean to ocean bridge, you know, right there in Yuma. We did all that. And then, interestingly enough, we had to move back to Chicago for a while. And then before we came down to Texas, and I ended up going back and forth a couple of 3 times on that road. So I felt a whole lot like it was, and I didn't know at the time that half of it was the Lee Highway. And so essentially I was able to really use all that, you know, experience.
That's great. And that was before you even knew this book was going to be.
Absolutely.
You just never know what you're going to pull from.
No, and that's part of the fun. I got to tell you, that's part of the fun, especially the one I'm actually writing right now. You just pull, you know, if you live long enough, you got so many, you all know this, you got so many stories and you got so much experience, you know, you got just, you know, why not use it, right?
That's great. So next question, somebody says at the beginning you spoke about what giraffes can teach humans, and that also came across well in the book. Tell us about your study and research on giraffes that led you to focus on that. You sort of alluded to that. And
yeah. Well, when I was at the zoo, I did a book. The first book I did for them was in '98, and it was about the visionary director in the 50s and 60s who created the moats in the zoo. You know, everybody, any zoo you go to right now, there are no fences. There are no cyclone fences anymore. They're pretty much, it's almost all moats. And he kind of started all that. He got it from a German zookeeper back then, but that was in the middle of World War II, so nobody could do anything about any of his ideas until this man came back he'd already been there as a veterinarian to the San Diego Zoo in the 50s. And I'm telling you this because one of the things that stuck with me is, when I was writing that book, was he figured out that a giraffe, you know, what can you do with a giraffe? You got to have all this big 30-foot cyclone fences or something to keep them in, right? In a small area, which at that time, what San Diego Zoo was still very small, and it's still small. It's 100 acres. The Wild Animal Park, which is now called the Safari Park, is 800 acres. It's, you know, it's wonderful. It's out in the desert, but this is 100 acres. So they had to come up with something. He told his designer to do some research, and what they did was they figured out that a giraffe, if you just have a moat of about 10 inches, just 10 inches, a giraffe will not step down. And I think a lot of it is because they lived their lives, they came from the savannah in Africa. And of course, that's just totally flat, just flat, you know. And so essentially, I think what happened was they figured out that they even tried it just to make sure, and they were holding their breaths, and the giraffes would not do it. They would stay in with nothing more than 10 inches, a 10-inch drop. So they said, let's do this. And so the design became everywhere. Designed, and then they moved on to all, of course, all the other enclosures too. But I recall reading that story, and then I recall going out, and I'd just gotten there. I just started the research for this, and I went out to the giraffe enclosure to see for myself, and I looked at the giraffes, and I have to tell you, elephants can make me kind of cry, frankly, because they are incredible, but they're so huge that I'm sad, because I think we will lose them ultimately. Maybe not before we all are gone, but the world is going to lose elephants because they need so much space. Giraffes, on the other hand, made me smile and made me feel good, and I couldn't decide how. And I started just thinking about what I videoed them for a little while and just tried to see why I felt the way I did about them. There's something so very serene about them. I have to say, after that, I was all over the zoo for all kinds of reasons. But the two places I would always go visit and stand and just be with the animals was the Galapagos tortoises. And oh my goodness, if you ever have a chance to be around that, you should. Talk about slowing yourself down. You got to slow down, But with the giraffes, I'd come just in a different way than the tortoises. I would come way down. I'd feel serene. I would watch how they moved. Something about them just seemed so placid and regal. And then I actually stumbled over the story. I think I put in there, I have red tail, about the giraffe that walked across France to Paris, who, when he was a sultan, I believe, gave it to the King of France. And the story about how it walked along and how 100,000 people ultimately followed it into Paris, and how they remarked about the same thing. They felt the serenity, they felt the grace, they felt an intelligence, but a very different intelligence than the elephants. Elephants are so intelligent, it can be scary, but it's scary, wonderful, but still unbelievable. With giraffes, their intelligence seems to be so laid back that you just, there's nothing scary about it. You just want to keep being around them. And so I fell in love, obviously, with giraffes. And so at that point, when I uncovered this story, which I uncovered pretty quickly after that, I remember taking pictures of that story in the scrapbooks, little articles cut out. While I was doing this other book, which had nothing to do with this 1938, it was about 1950s and 1960s. This one man called, and the book's called Mr. Zoo. And of course it was nonfiction. It's a biography, but I still kept those, and I kept them for 15 years, and then finally did something with them, and this is when that you're a crazy writer, because really, come on. Why should I have kept all that time? Because I was just mesmerized, and I loved the fact that I was connecting to someone who wrote about those giraffes back in 1938. There was a journalist behind that too, and it was quite wonderful to keep. So therefore, I just kind of kept moving on and loving giraffes the whole time.
That's a great story. Personally, I've loved the book for many reasons. My mother loved giraffes, and so I wish she had been here to read it with me. It just made me think about her and why and I'm like, oh, I know why you love giraffes. They're great. I don't know if I told you, I didn't tell you this, but several years ago, the giraffes at our zoo, the giraffe had a baby, and there was a giraffe cam, and we were all watching it day and night, waiting for the baby to be born. And it was like we'd all had our own baby. It was so exciting. So I think everyone's a giraffe fan in some ways.
I know. In fact, even with people who've never seen a giraffe, I have so many of them saying, I got to go see a giraffe now. I thought, well, you already wanted to. I just gave you.
That's right. So Ellen asks if you can tell us anything about what you're working on now.
Yeah, I can, just a little bit, because frankly, it's on this side. I'm still creating it, and it's on this side of the editorial process. So who knows what it's going to end up being, right? It's what it is. It's going to be. I guess the teaser would be that it is a semi-autobiographical novel of growing up in 1964, and it is going to in a little segregated tiny little Texas town. And I kind of riffed off from there and used a lot of the experiences that I had, but also creating this little town. And it's much tinier than my town, but it worked best to be tiny. And it's right outside of Fort Worth. I think it's going to stay there. And, and that's funny for me to say, but that's the way it is, as a writer. He's like, well, maybe tomorrow I'm going to move it down to South Texas. I don't know. But no, I think it's going to stay there. And so it's a segregated little town, and it's going to have a pastor feud, a softball game, a classic book in it, and the Olympics. So again, welcome to my mind. So, I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Well, the person who asked that question is also a writer, so she probably understands your process better than most. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
The terror and the awe and, the fun.
Well, we have time for a few more questions. And while y'all are putting your questions in, and I'm not sure who's in the room with our live audience, but if anybody in there wants to pop a question in, you can. But Lynda, I'll ask, what do you like to read? I know writers are big readers too. What kinds of things do you read?
Oh, well, I'm one of those people I'm one of those writers who can't read other people, at this point, at least in my life. I can't read other people while I'm writing something because I end up, sounding like them, that's the way it comes into my ear. I do tell a kind of a funny story about how when I moved back to Texas, and this has been 13 years ago, I had almost lost half of my accent. And I was working on my Faith Fast Darling's last garage sale, the one that I was already working on at some up north. And I recall that when I came across the Texas state line, I seriously my accent just came totally bad, and just almost immediately, So, I have had long stretches. So essentially, I had to keep that, and I wanted it for the debut novel, the major publishing, Faith Fast Darling's novel. So I couldn't read for long stretches of time for several years. I couldn't read anything else, but because I wanted to keep that. But again, I have a couple of literature degrees. I have an undergrad and I have a master's in American Lit. So I did a lot of reading before I got to my own literary time. But I did notice that, and right now, for instance, I have 2 or 3 I went ahead and just bought. So they're sitting over here. And the moment that I have a chance to read again, which is probably going to be at the end of the year, I'm going to have a lot of fun with them. So I have a list and I know what I'm going to do. But essentially right now, what I do is I read, I can't read fiction. Let's just put it this way. I can't read fiction because of the voice thing. But I can read lots of nonfiction, and normally I would do it in context with my research, and that's always worked out pretty well, and then I'd end up just saying, oh, this is really interesting, and so I'd spend a couple of days just finishing the book. Yeah. But in essence, that essentially, and I'm also really kind of a little touch ADHD, I think, where that hyper focus pops in, and I don't want to do anything but write and stay in my world, that world I'm creating. And so far that's worked really well, except, I am in physical therapy for my for my neck and everything by standing here, staring at the same sentence for, an hour. But beyond that problem, I essentially am still doing the same thing. I am really focusing. And when I stop, I have fun. I have my list of things I'm going to read. But right now, and, I'm really eclectic, as you might guess. I mean, Lord help me, I've actually had to be, for all the things I've written in the last 2-3 years. But that little ADD thing, I think, comes in there too, because I essentially don't want to be anything but eclectic. I want to have all these experiences, let's pull in, from all these different kinds of things. So I can't really tell you exactly what I like to read. And my answer would probably be, I like to read everything, almost everything. There's just a few kinds of genres that I really wouldn't go into. Romance is probably not going to be one thing that I'm ever going to read again. I think I may have long ago. But beyond that, mysteries I still, read. And so obviously literary things. And the older I get, the more I notice that I don't read deeply literary things, which is interesting, because that's usually what used to be what I loved.
There's so many good books out there and not enough time for all of us.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but like when Barnes and Noble first came into existence, y'all been around just as long as I have, so you know what I'm talking about. So essentially, back in the 90s, you had those little, what was it called? Little bookstores that, little bitty bookstores. Oh, Walden's. Okay, so you had little Walden's, right? That's all you had. And they were kind of sitting there, just little things that are in a shopping mall. Suddenly, Barnes and Nobles opens up, and Borders. And this is an entire big, oh my gosh, I would walk in and have an anxiety attack. I would not know where to start. I seriously, I think this is crazy. Why am I having an anxiety attack? Too little time, too many books, too little time, right?
Yeah, but so it's such a fun way to spend your time. So a question from our live audience: was there a reason you had Red lose all of her pictures?
Say it again.
Why did Red lose all of her? The flood came and all the pictures were gone.
Okay, I was just being dramatic.
Sorry.
A lot of it was, I think that it had to be something really, well, if you notice, she also saved the day by doing so.
Right.
So I decided that it had to be something incredibly remarkable, a sacrifice that she made, even though she didn't really quite know she was doing it. She knew she had to do something. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, it had to cost her something. And as real life is, it had to cost her something. And what it did was cost her the reason that she was going. And if you noticed, she also found out she was pregnant, which also, the older lady, if you recall, at the tent camp that night, told her why she was throwing up, told her what was happening, and she knew. And everything started falling into place in what she had to do, what she needed to do. She was suddenly going to have to take control of not her dreams, but also just her responsibilities, And I think that's very real life too, but also we can also relate to it. I think, very few times in life, I think, do we make choices that don't have ramifications. And hers had to be that. And she also had to be the hero. We had to let her be the hero, right?
Yeah.
And it turned out to be quite responsible, in the sense that she hadn't been very responsible before, on purpose, made herself not be responsible so she could have her dreams.
Well, we're almost at 1 hour. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, she did get part of her dreams, if you notice. That's why I put the list in there.
That's right. Yeah. We're almost at the end, and our questions are going to work out just about right, I think. So Nancy wants to know, were there many other zoos in our country in 1938 besides, of course, San Diego?
Yeah. If you recall, at the very beginning, a vet came to the quarantine station when they first got there after the hurricane. And he came and, well, he came to the harbor and then, you know, followed them in. He was from the Bronx Zoo. Now, the Bronx Zoo had been there forever, and they'd even actually had tried to have giraffes. And I think I was, you know, trying hard to put all this stuff in the book. I mean, all this stuff in the book, right? I mean, I've actually had people ask me the things that, you know, I packed it in so much that they just went right over it, you know. So they would ask me, I go, well, okay, go back to page 398. Okay, it's right there. And there you go, you know. But the Bronx Zoo, right at the beginning, was the major, I guess it's pretty much the major one in the country. You know, think about 1938. They'd actually tried to have giraffes, and it was too cold up there, and they lost them. And essentially, I don't think there may have been one. I think the Washington Zoo. Yes, the Washington Zoo was there. The National Zoo was there, and of course that's in the book too. And then there were tiny little ones. That's why they were able to. They wanted to have some. They were a little more menageries than they were anything. If you recall, in Little Rock.
Yeah.
Memphis had one. Little Rock. I guess, was just a step above a menagerie, and yet you know, they weren't even expecting to stay there, to stop there, because it was so small. But as it turned out, they all knew, you know, and they would have, all these zookeepers would have known Belle Benchley, and essentially, you know, would be happy to help. But there were a lot that were out there, but they weren't very significant ones. And almost all of them were just, you know, for people to come and see and gawk. That's why monkeys, when they looked at the monkeys in Little Rock, I had them, the Red ask, you know, how it felt, you know, that they may not ever feel free again. And you know, what he was mad at her. So I think he said something that had nothing to do with it, acted like he didn't understand what she was saying. And I think that I wanted to make real sure we understood, and then that the reader now, today's reader, understood. The reader now who sees what zoos do now, and they never put just one poor little monkey in a cage by itself. They almost always have two at least, and try to have groups. Because, you know, they're like us, they're animals, or the mammals especially. They're group oriented, and I think that you know, that's we've come a long way from that era. But even the San Diego Zoo was like that back then too. It just happened to be people. I wish I had time to tell y'all some of these stories, but I hope you have a chance to read. Some of you, you can at least go on their website if you can't get the history of the San Diego Zoo, the book. But you have and sailors would come off of boats, of ships, and they would bring animals and hand them to him, penguins, and they had too many penguins once, and they said, well, sorry, we cannot take any more penguins. And essentially these Navy guys, the sailors, they had to get back on the trip, on the ships. They would let them go. And in San Diego, there was an article about it. There were penguins walking down the roads, you know. So you essentially had all these incredibly crazy stories they had a bear. The first bear at the zoo was a bear that was a mascot off a ship, and they gave him to the zoo. You know, he got real big, and they didn't know how to get him to the zoo. And so the Wiggerforth, the man who created the zoo, just back in the late 20s, put him as a picture, put him in his Model T, or his Model A, I guess at that time, and drove him to the zoo. You know, so they're, you know, crazy stuff, but you know, animals, you know, they were just there, and they were just animals, and now we feel very different. And
that reminds me, when I was growing up, even, much later than 1938, there was an Exxon station in Columbia, South Carolina that had a tiger. His name was Happy. And when they built we have a wonderful zoo in Columbia. When they built the zoo, Happy was the first animal given to the zoo. He had his own separate habitat because, of course, he could not be with other tigers. But that just made me think about that. Well, we are bumping up on it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I said, there you go. That's it. That's actually,
we are at an hour. So we've got lots of comments coming through about how much people have enjoyed different zoos when they were growing up, and thanking you for a great presentation. And I'll just close out with one comment that we got from the same person whose husband is a zoo educator. She said that they wanted you to know that many people in the education department at our zoo have read the book and adored it and wanted to congratulate you on the book.
Oh, well, thank you. Please tell them thank you. I just am so excited to hear how this is, all people from all walks of life. It's just amazing. I must tell you this one.
Okay.
I had one yesterday from a man who said that he said that I know how many blank pages there are at the end of the book. There are 13 because I kept wanting something more. And he said, I need to tell you, I was when I was in the service, he said he was in on a submarine, and he kept hearing before the sounds were a big thing. He started recording them, and he was thinking about those well sounds, and even back I guess it sounded like he was in his 80s, and this had been like in the late 40s. And he was into whale sounds, and it teared me up. It's just the way he told me about, what it meant to him and how he got it that early, about animals.
Well, this has been just a wonderful way to spend an afternoon, Lynda, and we are so grateful that you could make time for us. And thank you for answering all of these questions, and thank you for writing a great book.
Well, I appreciate it more than you know. And I also have had incredible amount of fun with y'all. I would love once again to thank all of you for the honor of choosing Rest with Giraffes with y'all, for y'all.
Thank you. And
see y'all later.
Look forward to your next book.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm
Really
so
enjoyed
glad y'all enjoyed it.
Thank you, Lynda. Thank you, Nancy from Jeannie Miner.
Thank you, Nancy.